Hello to Mindfulness Collective. This right here, right now, is the joy of being a live stream coming to you live from Brooklyn, New York. And if you're joining us anywhere other than twitch.tv/deepmindfulness, please come on over. We'd love to have you here. Folks, what is up? It's Monday in the house. We're going to have a little fun. Going to do some meditation. Today is a pretty interesting, fun day. Very exciting news related to all these crazy protests that are going on. If you're not coming in from the United States, then I'll give a little context. But folks, answer me this. Where are you coming from? How's everyone doing? Where are you coming? Where are you at? I like my misspellings. Okay, so folks, very excited about today. We're going to be doing something different than we usually do. We're going to be talking about some policy. In particular, what the hell does it mean to defund the police? We hear people shouting this if you've been in the protests. You hear people talking about it potentially online, and it's a very particular topic. And now the Minneapolis Assembly is deciding to move forward with a veto-proof margin of folks to effectively defund the police. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that there's suddenly no support of any kind? No, it does not. Does it mean the communities are now left in total anarchy and chaos? No, it does not. And we're going to talk about what that means, and in particular, how do we relate that to, what's it called? How do we relate that to meditation? How do we use our meditation practice to be more resilient in the world? And that'll be a larger question here. How do we use our meditation practice to be more resilient, to do whatever we want? Maybe we completely disagree with this idea, but we're going to use our practice to explore that. So Nick is hello Punk Mondays. I know, I was like, I got to put a shirt on. And then I was like, do I really have to put a collar shirt on top of this today? Visiting us from Carlstad, we have Chris in Kentucky. Welcome, Carl from Vancouver. Lovely. Thanks for joining us from Vancouver, Carl. I was just telling my wife that we should go to Vancouver as soon as we can because it's so lovely. I'm placing it. Vancouver's the city that is in the mountains, right? It's like there's city in mountains. It's sort of like very, very beautiful. I have a little bit of drone footage from there when I flew there, or when I went there for a retreat, or I went there for a retreat that was up in Denman Island. Folks, where else are folks coming from? Where do you live in this world? The mountains are behind you. Yeah, I remember now. It's quite beautiful. I had Rory from Kingston. Nice to have you here. Lovely. If folks don't know, that's in Ontario. So we got a good Canada contingent here. We got Europe versus Canada here. We got a couple people from United States. United States has got to show up. You know, we're supposed to be the best in the world. So if we're not representing here on the stream, then we're going to lose our world dominance. So. But okay, so right now we've got a nice rivalry here between Europe and Canada. So America's out of the running at this point, but we'll see how this unfolds. Where are you coming from, folks? So we're going to talk a little bit today about some very interesting topics and use that as a way to advance our meditation practice. As always, that is the question. How can we use this to develop and advance our meditation practice? Hello from England. 2020 CL is joining us here. Okay, so we're pretty neck and neck at this point. Europe and Canada are pretty solidly tied. Oh, my poor little puppy is whimpering. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Today she gets her cone off. It's very cute. One sec. Okay, we're going to get a puppy visit here. Okay. So we got a link here. This does not look like a virus. Exactly. So this is a link. I'm gonna just put this. See if I can put this right in so you guys can see it. Window capture. Is that the thing I want? No, it's not that. Monitor 2. Oh, I see. Okay, we're skipping the picture for now because we have a delicious little gift. Look who it is. Look who it is. Oh.
She's bumping the microphone.
Oh. She was like energy energy free for a while. She's like, I'm so docile after this surgery. No, now her energy's back. That's for sure. Okay, let's support her butt. She wants butt support. Oh, there. Nope, she does. She doesn't. Okay.
My hand is supporting her butt.
Okay. Okay. There she is, little cutie. Hello, little cutie. She's like so happy. She's so excited to get her. She's kicking me so I can't support her butt. That's funny. Okay, there you go. Look, you're totally supported. Now you're supported. A little teddy bear. Her belly's all shaved because she had a little surgery. What a sweetie. Hello, dear. Hello, dear. Yeah, you're going to get this cone off today. Don't worry, it's going to be great. We're going to get to wash that stinky beard. Her beard is all matted and like beat up because it's like smushed on this cone for a week. Okay, dear, run along. Okay, I'm letting the beast loose. Raquel?
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Okay, so I want to show this picture. Oh, I see. This is this. Okay, then I need to take this picture here and zap a zoop. Like this. Oh, she ran away again?
She's coming back to you.
She's coming back to me. What a sweetie. Okay, so this is our Vancouver pic. See if we can shrink it to the point. There we go. See, this is Vancouver. Very lovely. I was flying a drone in there to, like I said, there's a crane and I wanted to fly under the crane. I thought it'd be very cool. I just secretly just zapped my drone up, and it was just before it became illegal there. And I was flying through, and just as I was about to cross into the crane, I see that like there was a cable that was holding the crane that was like whatever, and I was like basically flying directly into it, and there was like at that point I couldn't even tell if I had already hit the cable because it was like, you know, timing wise there's like a little bit of a delay. So I was like, that's it, I guess I just keep flying straight forward and see if I like don't nick this cable of this thing with the, you know, expensive ass drone. And I didn't. So I have this nice footage of the thing flying right into the drone. Beautiful, looks very smooth and elegant, filming the city of Vancouver. So maybe I'll show us that one day. Okay, monitor 2 is off. Okay, what's been going on in the chitty chatty bang bang. Okay, we got some emojis here. Christine Marguerite, lovely to see you here. Nice, thanks for joining us here on the live stream. Thank you too for all the work and love you offer, or should I say 3? Yeah, exactly, it's 3 at this point. So thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. So today we're going to be talking about a very interesting topic, which is this idea of defund the police. Now, when I first heard this, you know, chanted in the protests, I was like, is that a good idea? That seems like maybe a bad idea. And it's a very interesting idea, actually. It's not as sort of knee-jerk as it sounds, and I want to talk about it. Although what I found is when I was talking about it, I would get internally, the system would get very riled up. So we're going to use this topic to explore how to deepen our meditation practice today and see sort of what arises for us. So folks, we're going to meditate for 25 minutes. If that sounds crazy to you, don't worry. I haven't lost one yet. So what I'd like you to do is find a nice seated position that you can maintain for the duration of the sit. Folks, having done a full cleanup of the area, look what I found. Look, all the strikers for the bell. I have one bell. I only need one striker, and this is what I go through. I even rotate to one of Raquel's makeup brushes. I think this is actually technically mine, but all the strikers are in one place. It's sort of less convenient to have all of them in one place than just to have one, but lo and behold. Folks, very excited to be here with you today. Very happy that we get to meditate and especially get to talk about this topic because I think this is very interesting. So folks, find that nice position that you can maintain for the duration of the sit, sitting at the edge of your cushion, arranging the body well, the knees lower than the hips. Finding a nice balance point, whether you're sitting on the floor or sitting on a cushion or sitting on a chair. we will begin. Just adjusting that, and we'll begin. She's locked up.
You want me to create her?
Would you?
Yeah.
Beginning by taking a few comfortable deep breaths and just feeling the body rise and fall. Seeing if we can detect the breath in the body. Seeing if we can detect it all over the body. All of the breath sensations that we can detect from head to toe. And today we're going to use the breath to relax the body. Usually takes a few minutes to settle into the posture, and we're going to use the breath as the mechanism by which we can settle in. So beginning by feeling the body rise and fall. Noticing that as the diaphragm pulls down, this causes the belly, lower abdomen to expand. This causes the lower ribs to widen and stretch. Causes the spine to straighten. The upper chest opens, widens. Again, these are all subtle sensations that occur with every in-breath. So the in-breath stretches the body upwards, outwards. And the out-breath brings relaxation to all of these same parts of the body. So letting the breath be that which guides our posture adjustments. So I'm going to give some posture suggestions, but be sure that you're only adjusting them with the breath. So this may take a few breaths to get to, but noticing the movement that the breath provides to the body, and then using those movements to slowly make these adjustments. So for instance, if I say elongate the spine, we're simply going to breathe in, letting the spine elongate on its own and just allowing it to stay there. So we're not pulling past where the breath would guide the spine, but breathing in nice and deeply, letting the spine naturally elongate with the breath, and then to some degree keeping this position We're going to allow the neck to elongate. Again, not pulling the neck, but noticing the elongation of the neck as the body breathes in comfortably, deeply. Letting the shoulders fall back. Again, not pulling the shoulders back, but noticing that as we breathe in, the shoulders fall back just slightly, and we can maintain that position. Breathing in again, perhaps the shoulders fall back again. Only moving as accordance with the breath. Using the breath to find a balance of the spine and neck. And once we've found a balance, one which is supported by the bones of the body, not by the muscles. We're not pulling at all. We're really just balancing the spine, balancing the head on the spine. Resting and settling into this balance. And resting into the ebb and flow of a body breathing. Rather than observing any one particular sensation of the breath, seeing if we can notice all of them together as one large collection. Not trying to control the breath, just letting the body breathe as it will. Imagining for a moment that this is the one and only time we'll ever be able to detect the breath. This is the only chance we'll have to detect this breath sensation in this particular moment. And letting go of simply attending to the breath, and we're going to attend to all of the experiencing that's available now, allowing the mind to take a kind of snapshot of our current experience, all seeing, hearing, and feeling. Again, we can't capture every bit of data, so just whatever is easy to capture in the general bubble of our senses. Noticing all that is available now. All that's currently, presently in contact with our sensing capacity. Our mind may tell us that there's something more, there's some goal. We're going to capture more data, or we're going to reach some kind of state. There is an important future or a moment that will come that will be satisfying, but being sure to include this, any sense of where we're supposed to be headed or an idea of how this is going, assessing this particular experience. Recognizing the body sensations as nature, sounds as nature, mental images as nature, our assessment or the assessing tendency of the mind, good, bad, neutral, nature. The observing tendency of the mind, the observing function, this too is nature. So our experience is simply nature watching nature. So whatever seems like it's not part of the meditation, we might call these distractions or unconscious forces or habits, just recycling that back into the practice. There's nothing outside of this practice at this time. Even if distraction arises, just recognizing this too as part of nature. Part of the nature of distraction is to deliver us to unconsciousness. It's okay. Simply being conscious of this can dissolve any delusion. So what we're going to do is begin to notice the sensations of the body in relationship to emotion. Emotions tend to be felt in two general areas. So on the surface of the body, we often feel emotion in response to our current environment. Light and effervescent, a little bit like a temperature change. We can imagine a flash of joy or a flash of rage sweeping across the body and disappearing just as quickly. We often don't recognize peace as an emotion because we simply don't detect any emotion. Peace is very subtle. So at any point, if we're looking towards emotion in the body, where it's experiencing some part of the spectrum of emotion, either strong emotion or very, very low emotion, or even no emotion. So if you don't feel any emotion, that's fine. That's still in the range of emotion, in the same way that silence is part of hearing. And if you feel strong emotion, just know that this is also part of the range of emotion. If at any point we feel the emotion is too much, and that's a skillful recognition, and we can choose to change our practice. Focusing on something else, or perhaps practicing with the eyes open, resting on a single point. Or if we need to, we can actually just pause the meditation itself, just not practice for a moment. So I'm going to say a series of words, some of which will have an emotional charge for some people and some of which will not. So paying attention to the body, what's the body's response to these prompts? Not worrying about what the mind says, not worrying about mental imagery or mental audio, although allowing that to occur in the background. And the first prompt is the word above. Above. Does the body have an emotional response to this word? Or below? Below. Is there any emotional response to the following? Authority above. Authority above. Authority below. Authority below. Noticing the precise size, shape, location, activity, intensity. And if there's low or no emotion, noticing the size, shape, and activity, intensity of this. What's the body's reaction to the following word? Citizen. Citizen. Sometimes if we identify with a word, there's an emotional connection. And the same is true if we do not identify. What's the emotional response in the body in relationship to the word police? Again, monitoring our own level of comfort or discomfort, knowing it's okay to pause if we'd prefer. In fact, it's skillful. Police. Sometimes we identify with a word and it feels comfortable. Sometimes we disidentify or feel like it's alien, we don't like, and the system pushes it away. And sometimes we feel neutral. So picking up on what the body does with this set of sounds. And what's the body's response to the words peaceful protest? Peaceful protest. And staying with the practice, staying in stillness. allowing a tiny bit of light to enter the eyes, eventually allowing the eyes to rest on a single point as they fully open. Again, staying with the practice, staying in stillness. Noticing the residue or remnant of emotion in the body due to this series of words. Perhaps it's neutral, perhaps it's uncomfortable, perhaps it's pleasant. But whatever it is, allowing this particular moment, fighting against, pushing away, judging, dismissing, whatever is happening now, this can cause more discomfort. And letting this moment of acceptance of whatever's occurring for us, letting this be the great teacher that shows us how to bring this practice into our daily lives. Okay, so what was that like? Making any adjustments you need to allow the body to be comfortable. What on earth was that experience like? Let me know in the chat. Oh, we have a lovely follow here from Archelot. Archilot. Thank you so much, Archelot. Lovely to have you here. And P.S., if anyone doesn't know, if you're here on Twitch, you can follow. That gives you, I think, some benefits. You can type, I think you can do emojis in the chat, that kind of thing. Always important in a meditation, be able to do emojis. And then it gives you updates on when we go live, but you can control the level of updates you want, that kind of thing. And we appreciate it. We appreciate folks following us here. I think at some point we hit 50 followers, and I was like, wow, like, it was just funny. That point came and went so quickly that I just missed it, and I'm not even sure. I can't see from my interface. I can't see how many followers. I'm curious if anyone could see that on Twitch. I'm curious how many followers we have at this point. So, folks, what was that meditation like? What happened, and what do you like now? Describing our sensory clarity. So, this is something I'll give as a little context. I'm always like, hey, what was that meditation like? Describe what it's like. Partially, I'm like, nudge, nudge. Might be a good idea to explain, describe what your meditation was like. Part of moving forward and having an advanced practice is to be able to describe the phenomenology, the sense sort of data of what happened in our practice. Awareness was here. I was, a little bit distracted, and then it was drawn to this sensation. When I heard this particular word, this sensation arose in the body. Resistance arose at this level, these kind of things. This is a major part of how we advance our practice. In part because, I've been thinking about this thing recently a lot, that we navigate these two different realms of experiencing. We navigate the realm of concept and the realm of, let's say, raw sense data or phenomenology. And what happens is that people will confuse the two, and they'll supplement one for the other. So what I'm trying to do is help people use the realm of concepts and language and have that drive their relationship and expand their relationship to the phenomenological. So that's why I suggest, hey, describe what happened. That will advance your practice. So you made the effort of practicing, so now if you want to make the effort of describing what occurred, you can do that in two ways. One is just right here in the chat, the chatty McChatterson, and then the other one is right here on Zoom. So I'm going to put the link for our Zoom here in the chat. And if you want to jump on, oh, thank you. Oh my goodness, Jesus, we have over, I was going to say, oh, maybe we reached 100 followers. That's crazy. We have 225 followers. Crazy. Thanks, Rory. Thank you for letting me know. Wow, okay. Well, I was like, we should make a big deal out of it when we get to 100 followers. It's pretty cool. That's fun. Okay. Because that's what I want. I want followers. It's a funny term. Subscribing is what you do on YouTube. So it's makes a little sense, sort of more straightforward, but it's like a funny thing, especially from a meditation point of view. It's like, yes, I have a band of 225 followers who, blah, blah, blah. Okay, folks. So hit me up. What the hell just happened? Was it challenging? Was it difficult? Was it fun? Was it all neutral? I played it pretty easy. I didn't want to be overly triggering. Some people just don't care about any of these words. Some people, these words can be very intense. I started with some more neutral terms, just above and below, that kind of thing. And I also emphasized being sure to manage your own level of discomfort, because for some people, this material could be very disconcerting, just sort of even mentioning these words in meditation. Does mindfulness lead to persistent non-duality? Absolutely. There's no reason it can't. And honestly, like, if you get deep enough on the path, that's the sort of that's what I would consider is a sort of a potential eventuality. Here's what I would say, though. Here's what I want to say about non-duality. I think that when I went to school for fine art, I noticed this thing, that there be things called postmodern or post-minimalist or post-feminist. And at first I thought that meant like they were like, oh, we've dropped that and we've left that. So what I want to emphasize here is that, or what I'm emphasizing here is that actually what those statements meant is that what they did is they took the principles of that field of understanding, modernism or feminism, and they were viewing it from a sort of larger context. So in a sense, it was almost like a much deeper, richer, relationship to modernism or feminism or structuralism or this kind of thing. It wasn't an abandonment of it, wasn't getting rid of those things. So I'm saying that because there's this idea that persistent non-duality, and maybe non-duality itself, what that means is that duality is not possible even. Like if you say, okay, well, persistent non-duality, then you wouldn't have an experience of duality. Well, I don't know that I wouldn't describe it necessarily that way. So you could describe duality, or you could describe the goal of practice as being getting to non-duality, which is a duality for sure. I mean, the concept of getting to non-duality is another duality that you'll have to break through. And then, persistent, again, is another concept. Like anytime we break down a concept, or we break something down into a concept, or we maybe not break down, but gather things together in the form of a concept, we're producing a kind of duality. So I think for me, it's, do you have consistent access to non-duality, right? And can you see that duality or multiplicity is on the same spectrum, that they're actually very intricately locked together, and that things can become, you could say, dual, and that is actually linked to non-duality. So right now I can experience a sense that there's a system, giving this information that there's an experience of self, there's an experience of inside and outside, self and world, this kind of thing. I can detect and experience the two creating tension together, but I can also detect very clearly the relationship of that duality to its own breaking apart into non-duality, and it's not theoretical, it's very experiential. I can watch the two collide and break apart and sort of do this dance together. So some people would say, well, that's if duality exists, or if you can even detect duality, then there's something wrong. But I just want to sort of, hopefully that disambiguates, not ambiguates, if that's a word. I just wanted to make that point there about persistent non-duality. Thank you for that, Bloody Dior. I'm wondering, Bloody Dior, are you into the clothing line Dior, or is there another use of the word Dior that I'm unfamiliar with? I myself, do I still own Dior? I have a pair of Dior shoes. All of these were gifts, by the way. They were like from the really, they weren't like the sort of like kind of like consumer end. There's like really nice versions of these things, and they're gifts. I was not like in the market for a $6,000 suit or something like that. Maybe it's only $4,000, but again, was not my priority. The suit I'm trying to sell right now. Oh, P.S. If anyone wants to buy a goddamn Dior suit, I don't want this thing anymore. It doesn't fit me anymore. It's beautiful, and we're selling it for like $400 on eBay. So, listen, it's and it was a $4,000 suit. It's just people don't want used suits, or suits that they want things to say with a big thing on it that says Dior. I still have the shoes, but they're pointy, so I don't usually wear them. Carl S. says, oh great, so Carl has, this is what's called a meditation report. Attention focused on the breath without much distraction, and then I put my attention on each sensation. See, hear, feel as I notice it. Feeling emotion has seemed intense for me. Okay, good to know. And it's also, I mentioned before, like I said, self-regulating your own, difficulty is an important important thing. We don't want to just be like, well, I should be forcing myself through this. It's actually very skillful to say, hey, the system right now needs to cool out. I'm going to pull back. It's actually much more skillful than just bearing down. Sometimes bearing down is helpful, but I feel it in my chest, throat, pelvic, stomach. Oh, okay, this is important. I'm not sure about the feeling new emotion. I noted different reactions to the words. I was nervous for them, but hearing above, I felt calm. After that, tingling sensation arose with most words. Chest up on the right side. Chest up on the right side of the throat. Okay, so I just want to pause here. I don't want to. I love everyone's reports and everyone's, what everyone says about their meditation. I want to commend Carl S. Carl QS. Carl. Tell me how to pronounce it. I'll go with Carl S. Carl. This is a great example of, with this, I can really get into your experience, and I can really help in a way that I couldn't possibly otherwise. It's a lot of guesswork. I'm filling in pieces. I'm like, well, I think you're saying this. I think you're saying this. This is just very clear. So, scanning through here again. Okay, so feeling emotion seemed intense for me. That's good. You're having a sense of the intensity level, and you're getting a sense of when the system is exiting its own window of tolerance, right? We have a level of things we can tolerate, and when things start to exit that, the system goes into overwhelm. We just want to avoid that in general. Do whatever we need to keep the window of tolerance, to keep things within the window of tolerance, and then over time, just doing that and knowing that we can trust ourselves and stay safe, the window of tolerance itself just tends to open in that way. Carl, okay, excellent. So that's one thing. Is it seemed intense. That's excellent that you're tracking that. I feel it in my chest, throat, pelvis, and stomach. So this is something I didn't mention, I realize. I just mentioned what we were calling present moment emotion. So if you felt a reaction, I say a certain word, and the system produces like a little puff of reaction in the body, that emotion we're going to call present moment emotion, or emotion in response to a present moment environment. One trick to consider is that includes our beep, boop, boop, calculating. That includes our mind. So if we think of something scary, the system isn't, the body mind isn't smart enough to know that what we're actually describing is something that's imaginary. If you think of a scary tiger and it's growling and it's getting in your face or something, the system will start pumping adrenaline and start looking for threats. So it's like, think about the implications of that is like, if you worry about what people are saying about you, or if you're, we have ruminating thoughts or these kind of things of like, jealousy or these kind of things, the system will give you all of the reactions as though that's actually occurring. Any of the words I said today, nothing was actually occurring. They're just sounds you're hearing, but the system will still respond in that way. So that's what we'll call present moment emotion. On the other side, we might call old emotion. Old emotion is somatically held and is in response. I'm saying this is the word theory. The theory goes, and again, it's a theory because it's not proven by science, but most meditation technology is not proven by science. The science is way behind meditation in terms of, being able to have access to this stuff. The testing is just not there. We're just learning how to sort of begin to test even like what a dose of meditation is, or what are the implications of dose. So that's how I say theory. The theory goes that somatically held emotion is due to a situation where we couldn't experience that emotion, or didn't allow the system to fully experience that emotion in the past over and over and over again. So we're in an environment where that emotion is not accessible, or is not safe for us to feel, or we are taught, often that's the sort of the attachment theory side of this, is that we were taught and guided to, what is this other window? Sorry, real quick, I have a weird window open. I don't want that open. Okay, we're taught by the system that this is not safe. Often the caretaker's facial expressions shows us this is not safe. They don't know how to process the emotion, so the infant stuffs the emotion, makes himself not feel it, not feel it, not feel it. Eventually it becomes a somatically held emotion. Somatically held emotion tend to be felt deeper in the body. So present moment emotion tends to be sort of effervescent. Somatically held emotion tends to be held deeper in the body. So in the chest, throat, sternum, belly, lower belly, like all of these sort of central places, but they really can be anywhere. This is just a tendency. They have a more contractive quality, so they feel a little bit more like in the West we call it a Charley horse, or like a cramp. More contractive in their nature, and they're very stable over time. So one thing we didn't do today, but we could do, you could try on your own, is to use something that evokes an emotion, a present moment emotion, on one side of the body. Like it's, you're imagining something over here, it's right here. It's, it doesn't have to be unpleasant. It can be something very delightful. And then you drop that image and you just detect one side of the body and the other. And you'll notice that present moment emotion, or emotion in response to our current environment, is directional. It happens in the direction that we're experiencing the thing for survival purposes, right? Somatically held emotion is typically in the core of the body, which would make sense if if the system were trying to maximize self-protection. This yucky feeling happens, and we sort of close off in this way, sort of trying to like guard self. And this thing, maybe we have these strong emotions and we want to like we're not sure which direction it's coming from, so we just want to get to a safer environment. Maybe that's the reason for that. But they tend to have that sort of more central quality. They're very persistent over time. And you'll also notice that present moment emotions come and go. Like the intensity of the emotion of the words I was saying is probably a little lower now that you're listening to this sort of ongoing dialogue. We deal with them and we process them, and we want to have strategies to process these very, very differently. Present moment emotion, really all we need to do is to, stop end whatever the stimuli is. Stop the phrase being said to us, stop the thing that's occurring on one side of us, stop thinking about the thing, move away from the activity, and the system will just cool out. Old emotion is actually bubbling up because we have moved away, or rather we've not found it safe to feel that emotion for so long. So now we're getting into the territory of developmental trauma, and one of the best books on developmental trauma that I can recommend is called The Body Keeps the Score, and it has a list of a number of really excellent treatments for that kind of thing. Somatically held emotion and developmental trauma is something that I have had a lot of experience with and have been in lots of different treatments for, and lots of different processes to sort of work through. So it's a very slow and long process. If folks want me to talk more about that, I can, my own experience, but just general how to use meditation to do that. But it is a long, slow process. And if you work very diligently, it takes, I think it's a good estimate to say, like, if you want to break up these emotions, you should look at like a 5-year timeline. These older emotions are often driving, what we might call like addictive behaviors, or these kind of things. Driving, we feel like the addict, or the person who like has some sort of behavior that they have a hard time with, an emotion arises, and they it's too much. They can't do it, so they need something to shut down that emotion. The problem is that they've been doing that for so long, the emotion just keeps arising and rising, so they need more and more and more of the whatever their habit or substance is to manage that, to the point where it's just causing complete chaos in their life. So that is a general breakdown of some old emotion material. So all of that I've said just now comes from this one simple report. So if it's of interest, if you want to kind of maximize your beep boop boop, if you want to maximize how I can be helpful, which is great for me because I like to be helpful, let me know. Reports like this are really helpful. So hopefully that was helpful, Carl. One thing you might want to notice if you're detecting old emotion is just to start to notice, okay, this is that emotion. I notice, and even if you don't know the name, there's something. For me, for a while, I thought I just had this fear that was here. And then through a lot of meditation, a lot of practice, I realized it's actually sadness, and then in the middle was fear, which I thought was interesting. And that sometimes it would push towards the sad direction, sometimes it would push towards the fear direction. And I think that a breakthrough for me was actually the fear component broke down. And it was actually that the fear was a kind of protector against, which often fear is, and anger is often the same way, is a protector against the more vulnerable emotion. So now I'm actually being able to process the beep boop boop, being able to process the sadness, which is helpful because otherwise it colors the entire world. So folks, I wanted to jump into our topic for today. And part of our topic, I want to make sure I'm good with the calendar, good with my calendar, so I don't run into any students that are coming up today. Oh, good. Okay. Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, so we have time. I want to watch a video. The video is 15 minutes long. I think I'm going to bump the speed up a little bit by 25% and see if we can do that. And I want to, if we have time, go over another resource. Here are the resources that I'm going to be looking at today, if this is of interest. These are two very interesting resources. So one is a video describing what do we mean when we say defund the police. And we're going to talk about that and watch that. And again, I'm doing investigation too. I'm not an expert in this field. For me, I want to I'm not here to present myself as an expert. The other one is called Campaign Zero, and it's talking points. When people say defund the police, it's specifically, here are the exact things that can be done, broken down into very simple sort of explainable pieces. This is a project that Obama has been supporting and sort of promoting for a while. Really specifically, what does that mean? So let's go ahead and watch this video. And as we do this, let's do it as a meditation. So let's observe what happens in the body. Just the fact that we're going to do this, noticing what the system is doing. Is it pushing or pulling? I like this. I don't like this. This is neutral in my experience. Just observing that as it arises. So even if this is something that doesn't really click for you or isn't really that relevant for you, just trying to follow along emotionally with what's happening, what's coming up in the body, whether it's triggering old emotion, present moment emotion, any of these different aspects that we've been talking about here. Just going to set this up. Okay. I see. Okay. Okay. Actually, let me move it here, and I'll move my ass over. Oops, camera. Oh, come on. Okay, 1 second. This camera's not even mounted. It's like balanced here. Okay, well, I might be a little invisible. Oh no, I can do this. We're almost there, folks. Okay, excellent. So this is the video. Someone just commented, I want to see this. Okay, that's just the guided meditations. Great. Okay, so we're going to begin. Let's see if we can hear this.
He has written for The New Yorker, Slate, and is a current staff writer at The New Republic. Please welcome Osita Wanevu.
Hey,
first of all, thank you for joining and having this conversation. I was struck by a piece you wrote that talked about collective amnesia that you've seen in the coverage of these protests. And so I just wanted to ask if you could talk a little bit about what you meant by that.
Sure. So in the early days of the Floyd protests in Minneapolis, you had this big discourse about whether the protests were being conducted in a way that was politically productive, whether the looting and the vandalism you saw break out in some places was going to be destructive to efforts to get people to understand what was happening and why people were angry. It was going to overshadow the peaceful protests and so on. It was, to my mind, a replay of the kind of discourse you see time and time again with these protests where initially the reaction is very sort of fluid and explosive and spontaneous. There's a lot of hand-wringing about it. But ultimately, over time, things get smoothed out. You have a more controlled series of protests. And then people, in hindsight, say, well, this was obviously always going to be this was always a good thing. Protesters were great. They were noble. They were very MLK-like. This is what happened in Ferguson. I mean, I remember I was working as an intern at Slate that August, and I remember, trying to find live streams and people on the ground tweeting about what was happening because it wasn't initially being covered by cable news media. But, there was a lot of chaos in those early days. There was looting, there was vandalism, there was all the stuff people criticized about the Minneapolis protests then too. But I think over time, all of that has sort of been lost in our understanding and interpretation of what happened then. I think in very similar ways to how people sort of erase or elide the fact that, the LGBT movement, for instance, there's a riot at Stonewall that was very important in organizing that, gathering that. There were suffragettes who were radical and, were engaged in proper discussion on all this. And none of those things ever really, define movements as a whole. You'd be hard pressed to think about a movement that was always pure and everybody was doing the right thing in the eyes of opinion leaders from the get-go. There's always a lot of messiness to it. And I think understanding what's happening now in response to the killing of George Floyd, in response to the years of instances of high-profile police brutality, if you really want to sort of get at the fundamental dynamics of the movement here, I don't think you can let yourself be distracted by expressions of anger and anguish that might seem radical to you now, but in 2-3 years, I'm sure people will sort of say it wasn't that definitive.
So because these protests are so vast, we've seen a wide range of policies being advocated. There's obviously calls to defund the police. For a lot of people who are not familiar with the topic and are coming to the topic, defund the police sounds so radical. And when actually the policy is reform the police, demilitarize the police, and focus the police where actual armed security, armed safety officers are required. And for mental health interventions, addiction interventions, social welfare interventions, there's other conflicts between people in parking lots over parking spaces. There's a whole host of other responses that are possible.
Yeah. No, I think it's true. I mean, you have this conversation over and over again, I think, in democratic politics, especially over the past couple of years, where someone says something like abolish ICE, and everyone is sort of like, well, that's, nobody's going to go for that. It's going to lose you the suburbs. It's going to lose you this or that constituency. But then the response to that is, well, what can we do? Like, how can we move in this direction and sort of take some of the fundamental problems people are pointing at with that slogan? How do we take them seriously and get to a different set of policies? And so in the wake of that, you had people say, well, let's reorganize ICE, or let's sort of like see if we can assign some of these functions. Let's see if the organization or the agency needs this much money, etc. I think in the near term, that's what abolish the police, defund the police probably does. Yeah. I think it probably pulls people to ask more fundamental questions than they might have been asking had people not sort of pushed for the more radical position. But we'll see. I don't think that Joe Biden is going to run on defunding the police, abolishing the police.
I don't expect that.
But I do think that the energy from activists is probably going to inspire pretty good conversations, and I look forward to them.
It is extraordinary that the pandemic is still here. The crisis set off by the pandemic is still here. That if Biden is able to win in November, he will be inheriting a set of problems as vast as any president in our lifetimes, maybe longer. We'll have this unrest. Seems like these protests, this uprising against brutality and inequality is not going anywhere. The pandemic's not going anywhere. The economic dislocation is not going anywhere. What would it take for Joe Biden right now to make you and make others who are kind of pushing for a more progressive, more expansive, more left response? What would it take for you to feel as though Joe Biden is answering this call?
I think question. It's a big question, but I also think there's a pretty easy set of answers. I mean, you're hearing things from the campaign now that should be encouraging to progressives in certain ways on a wide variety of issues. I think that policing may well be the next issue where he sort of tries to offer the left something in the wake of these protests. But the main thing that I am looking to hear isn't really a particular policy solution to a specific problem. What I want to hear from Joe Biden is how he is going to reform American democracy so that those policies will actually pass early next year in the Senate, so that they won't get struck down by a Supreme Court that Donald Trump has now established a durable conservative majority on. I want to hear how the residents of D.C. are going to be offered representation within the next year, so that you can't have a president just sort of steamroll over them and try to control their city with an occupying force. Like these are, I think, structural issues that you heard some candidates talking about over the campaign more than Joe Biden did. Frankly, even though I was I was more supportive of Bernie Sanders, I think I don't think that'll surprise anybody. But even he sort of didn't really give the basic fundamental structural changes you would need to pass his policies sufficient attention. And I think that's a problem that Joe Biden has even more significantly. So that is the first thing. I want to hear from Joe Biden that he's going to come in and recommend to whoever the Senate Majority Leader is, if it's still Chuck Schumer when he takes office, that the Democrats, if they have a majority, eliminate the filibuster, move to simple majority, and start passing things that the majority of the people in this country want, and actually building a more responsive democracy. That's the only way he's going to get anything he wants to do done. So it's all well and good for him to say that he's moving left on this or that issue. But if you haven't done that, if you're not pushing for that, if you're not making a case to the American people for why those structural reforms have to happen, I think he's going to have a very hard time actually fulfilling the aspirations people have for his presidency.
I do think tied to that too is something you've talked about. It's something that a lot of people are talking about right now, which is sort of our collective pain tolerance for the amount of injustice, emergency that we tolerate, and that some of that is what allowed someone like Donald Trump to come in, that we look past a lot of cruelty, we look past a lot of injustice all the time. And
I just want to pause in case anyone has sort of drifted away from this as a practice, just checking in on how this is landing. Feel free to let me know in the chat what the emotional response is, if it sort of has produced emotional numbness, if the intellectual, interesting part of it is so active that it's hard to detect what's happening in the body. All of those are valid responses, and all of those are helpful and interesting in order to learn how to manage this material and learn how to use this as a meditation.
I've been to these protests, and in LA, you see the diversity of the city, and I've been struck by the support along the way, by people honking their horns, people coming out of their windows, and also by the diversity of the protests. When we talk about what this country can ignore, we tend to talk about what white people have been able to either ignore or benefit from or like, in terms of the lack of opportunity, the systemic oppression of people who didn't look like them, to such an extent that it became normal, became acceptable. How naive is it to look at these protests, to see this sort of diverse young coalition that's out on the streets in these cities and say, this group of people doesn't want to go back to that. This group of people isn't interested in ignoring these problems anymore, that maybe there really is a deeper shift?
Oh, I think it's definitely heartening to see the number of all the different kinds of people who are in the streets now. It's not just a small cadre of activists. It's a sort of broad assemblage of people who make up the Democratic coalition, people who aren't really that engaged with politics, coming together and saying that we can't stand for the way policing has been conducted in this country anymore. And along with that, making a broader set of demands. I think this is also sort of a lot of pent up energy about things that extend beyond the policing. So all of that is very heartening, especially for people who saw the end of the Sanders campaign, were kind of dismayed by it, and wondered where all of the energy was going to go. Well, this is where a lot of that energy, I think, is gone. But ultimately, I think the onus is now on political leaders, elected officials, to sort of do something with that energy that will, again, sort of make it so that it matters the majority of people are mad. Right now, we're not in a country where it matters the majority of people are mad about American policing or climate change or healthcare. It doesn't. Like, you can win the presidency without winning majority support of the electorate. You can win the Senate without getting majority support from the electorate. There are all of these structures in place that make it so that even if you have millions of people angry about a particular situation, nothing will change unless you fundamentally reconstituted certain institutions. So it's heartening to see people mad about the policy issues. And I just sort of wish that there was also a kind of, I don't know if you want to call it a protest movement or what, but also a set of demands from this crowd explicitly about reforming our institutions and making it so that they're more systematically heard. And the filibuster is not an issue that is going to that gets people fired up necessarily, but it is like very, very important. And I think that's ultimately things like that are ultimately the key to whether this movement goes anywhere or whether it sort of falls by the wayside. There's another instance where millions of people were mad about something, they got in the streets, but nothing really fundamentally changed. Gun control, in the past couple of years is a huge example.
It's also, I mean, you don't need to go to the national level. Los Angeles, New York City, these are cities where the popular majority is electing people who ostensibly agree, or at least have paid lip service to a lot of these notions, a lot of the desire to reform police, to prevent police brutality, and yet there's this sort of anti-democratic force in these cities, and a lot of times it feels as if the mayors serve at the pleasure of the police unions, and there's something about these protests. It makes sense that it would start on police brutality because it is such a stark example of an undemocratic force and a bunch of people all of a sudden saying, "Wait a second, we're in charge."
Yeah. One of my least favorite phrases in American politics is "this is not a partisan issue," which inevitably is describing a lot of partisan issues. This is one instance where, like, genuinely policing this country is not a partisan issue. You have Democratic majority cities like Minneapolis, like Baltimore, where you have these abuses happen in part because, as you say, leaders in those places are often deeply enthralled to police unions and police as an institution, and so there's a frustration there that can't really be resolved by saying, well, you should go out and vote. These people have been voting for Democrats, forever. I went to school in Chicago, and I was there when the Laquan McDonald's controversy cropped up, which is this horrific thing where you had people sort of covering up what had actually happened. Mayor at the time was Rahm Emanuel, came from the Obama White House, and I'm sure everybody who was mad about that in that city was a reliably Democratic voting person. So there's a level of there's a lack of accountability here that is kind of structural. It's not just a matter of people going to the polls, although going to the polls is important. You have to make sure that there are people at the polls you can vote for who take a more structural view of why things have gone wrong and are willing to push bold reforms. And frankly, it's often not hard for those people to get ahead if you have establishment politicians sort of poo-pooing proposals that they see as radical about reforming the police. Ultimately, you're going to have to see progressives, people on the left wing of the party actually prevail in these elections against some of the more entrenched leaders in some of these cities.
Yeah, and leaders just sort of, either it's going to be people taking that power from them, or the pressure from outside reminding them that they have power to begin with. Osita Wanevu, thank you so much for joining us. Such a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was great.
Okay. So some comments in the chat here. I just want to make sure that folks are, the big key for me is that folks are just attending to what's happening in the body. Whatever your position is, whatever your belief is, just attending to what that experience is like in the body now. What is occurring as I fiddle with this camera. Doesn't really want to be level. That's okay. Yeah, what was that like emotionally? What was that like experientially? Okay, it doesn't look like I can. The other issue that often comes up, well, I'll leave that there for now. Okay, it's a little crooked, but that's fine. I think we can live with that. Oh, we haven't transitioned. There we go. Excellent. Okay, so can anyone agree? Oh, sorry. Okay. Let's see. So, guys, we're entering into territory that is contentious, right? Contentious on the internet, especially. And the tendency, like, we'll look at the comments in the chat, right? The tendency is to immediately get into the content, which I think is important, and we can do that. But there are a lot of venues, a lot of places to, like, argue and be like, here's the content. Like, how can you, why do you believe this? And, et cetera, et cetera. And notice how easily we slip into that. Now, this is a meditation live stream, and I think I've been pretty emphatic. Please pay attention to how this is landing as a experience in the body, right? Please pay attention to what's occurring, what's arising in the, physical sort of emotional space. Now, of course, we're getting into tricky territory because we're talking about stuff that's tricky, but notice how quickly we exit our skills around actually what's happening in the body. And this is one of the reasons why our general dialogue around this is extremely chaotic and becomes extremely visceral and extremely sort of combative. And, the system creates a very strong inside and a very strong outside. And now it's like needs to protect the inside, needs to protect the outside. I mean, let's see here. Who was it? So Will Alexander Bethany says, talking about primary sources and this kind of thing. What if I said, and this is not what I'm saying. If I said, I've read no primary sources, I'm totally just going by my gut, and I talked to this one guy in the street, and this is what I believe, and this is sort of what I'm doing. You could say policy-wise, well, I'm going to listen to this person less, which would make sense. You'd say, okay, this person is not super informed. I'm going to be less involved here. But this is another part of this. Experientially, what happens to your relationship to that person? Do they become outside? Are they now somehow not worth listening to, or not worth, rather less listening to than being with? Is there some way? And you see this now with our dialogue on social media. When someone says something we don't like, and this is very cross, this happens for everyone. This is not like one side doing this. It's this sense of this person and this position can't exist. It's not even I disagree, not going to work. It's we need to make you not exist. And that's so fundamentally toxic to being a human being and being a society that works and lives together. So that's generally what I'd say is actually what's happening in our body. We can stop we can happily have the discussion, but I'm saying at this point we could just stop the discussion on policy and take a look at what's happening internally, and watching the narratives arising, watching where the system is aligning self, watching sort of if consternation or tightening is arising, tensions, especially if any of those are habitual. If you've had this experience or anything like this experience ever before, that's very significant, right? The system has a habit. Now, we'll talk to Will Alexander's point here. I think the general point, I think in the broadest, oops, I just unplugged myself. Unplugged my headphones by squashing them. 1 second here. All tangled up. As long as I'm audible, you just start default speaker. Ugh. Something got unplugged. I want to make sure my voice is still coming through. Okay, my voice is coming through. That's fine. So, to speak to your general point, what I think the larger point you're making is, if we don't have an objective view of what's happening, then our experience is going to be very distorted. It's going to be based on just driven by maybe emotion, or driven by our sort of cultural baggage. And if it's not really related to data, is I think is the argument being made, then it's unreliable and should be considered less significant. Great, that's a perfectly sound argument. There's nothing specious about that. There's nothing I don't think that's an argument in bad faith. And what I want to say is that is significantly that's significant because it's the same discussion point that I'm saying in relationship to meditation. If we can't actually detect what's occurring in our body, and can't especially detect these habit grooves that the emotional system has gone in, well, guess what? Now we're locked into a channel where we're being driven by emotion, regardless of whether we have data on our side or not. We're being locked into a position where we're less likely to be coming from a position that's, we could say, logical, if we hold logic as a very high ideal. I think logic is a very important ideal. So we can get caught in the same arguments that I could get caught in Twitter, right? We could do that here. But why not just go over to Twitter, and then we can argue with people we're never going to meet and whose minds we're never going to change. So I'm less concerned at this moment about changing minds, and more concerned about each of us individually and collectively being aware of these habit grooves which are driving us into these positions that are dangerous. What I would say, and correct me if this is wrong, that it seems that there seems to be these, this is getting into the content, but seems to be these situations over and over again, whether it's, I mean, regardless of race, there's definitely a huge race component for my personal opinion, where cops get into a situation, their emotions are so dramatically misattuned to what's going on, they make a decision in that moment that causes someone grave bodily injury or death, and then they are almost universally over and over again not, they're acquitted or not, not held accountable for what they're doing. So that what that means is, in America, for instance, we live in a society where if you know that meme. Okay, I want to look this up. Nope. I just want to get the name right. Okay. Amadou Diallo. So Amadou Diallo, and again, I'm not making the argument at this point that this is statistically proven, etc. So I'm not going down that route. What I'm saying is that we live in a world, this is still the case, where this gentleman's in his transom, or his entrance to his home, unarmed. A bunch of people who are also unmarked, and they're not police, whatever, they yell at him, and maybe even there's controversy whether they yelled police or not, but hey, people can yell whatever they want. English was not his original language. They sort of see him maybe reaching for something, it's unclear. Again, he was unarmed. And the police then execute this person, shooting him 41 times, right? 4 cops, 41 shots. All of these cops are completely acquitted, entirely not guilty, right? So just to consider, like, maybe that was just an oopsie and that's the society we live in, but we have to decide at some point, do we want to live in a society where that's okay? Is that ideal? That's even a better question. Is that ideal? And then we have to decide, do we live in a world where we try to move towards ideals or we do not? And so whether or not there's the argument of like whether this is like, I've just heard these arguments before that I'm like, and it's like, I think that they get so far into the weeds of like, I don't think it's like, basically the argument is like, well, statistically, if you get into like, it's like, I don't think from this perspective that much. I'll like hear people make the discussions and see where I land, but I don't try to like track all the data and say like, okay, I can recite it in some like argument bro sort of capacity, because I think that the world of argument bros is like also completely toxic. And I often find that the people who are like argument, like I know the data and I'm going to win this thing, are into winning arguments, and they're not really active in taking action. So tends to be what I find. So I usually rely the same way. I haven't done the primary research myself on climate change, for instance, but I trust the people who have. So there's this argument that what if it's not statistically significant, and what if it's actually the case that the arguments often, a lot of the people, and this is not to castigate all the arguments, but a lot of the arguments will then tend to be supported by and then fortified by a lot of emotional arguments that are often made by white nationalists. Again, not saying that's where you're coming from, not that any of the arguments are not valid, because that's the people who use those arguments. And that said, it's a really muddy set of territory. We don't have like beautiful data on a lot of this stuff. So what I would say is I think we have a greater obligation, if we want to help and change the world in whatever direction, is to get very clear on our own emotional experience, especially if there's people who identify as men here, especially those who just have a tendency to have more testosterone in their system. What that means is that we're going to be more likely to be okay with confrontation, experiential confrontation, and be less likely to be able to track and be aware of what's happening with us emotionally, even though those emotions are often driving a lot of our experiences. But that's, that's true for anybody. It's just more true for folks whose brains and biochemistry tend towards the male sex. So there's that. And then I was going to mention something else, which was, so another sort of point, just this, again, this is getting into the content again, so I just want to be clear. I'm about to get into content related to what Will Alexander said, and maybe I'll actually wait on that because I want to go make sure we're up to date with the comments. Rory says anxiety sometimes arises when hearing and reading angry responses and comments. Exactly. So, I mean, I should have brought it up a little bit more explicitly, but the comments, I've sort of foreseen this, is another place that we can look at this as you can call it a trigger practice, you can call it an evoking practice. Okay, let's see. Rory says, I have multiple emotions that appear: anxiety, fear, sadness, and sometimes hope. Excellent. Great, by the way. Thanks for the beard compliment. Let's see. I'm just going back here over some of this stuff. Let's see. Good looking honky says, we should go back to segregation before the Civil War breaks out. That's not being racist. That's the truth. Okay. So good looking honky. I'm going to go out on a limb here, being generous and being kind, assuming that you could just be trolling. If you're trolling, then just let me know and I'll just stop talking. I'll just let you sort of live your life, assuming you are trolling. But the suggestion of segregation is sort of definitively racist. So I don't think I'm not going to be like, you're a racist. That concept and the promotion of that concept would be definitely fit within the category of racist actions. So I'm just going to I'll just leave that there. I don't think it requires a lot more discussion there. Let's see. Will Alexander says, I think the risk there is a lot of gut feeling is based on primal evolutionary aspect of our brain and have often led to tremendous violence and other things that produce suffering. Yeah, I agree. And until we as a collective can really easily track, navigate, so we can track it, we can see what's happening. We can navigate it, say, okay, here's the interactions, here's what's happening for me, here's the effects it's having on my experience, and can communicate that. Until we can do those three things, we're just going to be run by that. Even, and especially people who think that they're fully guided by logic. We've seen a million instances of people who are like, I'm very logical, and they do things that are dramatically immoral or dramatically harmful or these kind of things. So I think that that's the only way that we're actually going to get anywhere. So if for you logic is a very important part of your worldview, is an important value for you, I would strongly recommend getting very, very good at sensory clarity related to emotions in the body. One place to start with that is this link that keeps popping up here for these 15 guided meditation. There are a couple meditations in there related to emotion in the body. And what we did today is another example of that. Let's see. Jamler says, why is this only happening in the U.S.? I've never heard of police violence outside of the U.S., outside of the U.S. Joining in late. So that's a good question, and I think that there is something about the U.S., and that's a big question. Why is it that the U.S. is more violent? Why is there sort of a culture of glorifying, I don't want to say lack of intelligence, but there's a culture of glorifying sort of simple folk kind of thing, which I think that there is, okay, hot take, folks, you want to hear, if this hasn't been contentious enough already. I think the one area that we're fully comfortable being ableist and being we wouldn't say oh, this person's in a wheelchair, what a loser, we all are hopefully aware at this point that that's a terrible thing, and we wouldn't want to hold that position. And yeah, listen, some people will, but it's the internet. What are you going to do? And the place where we're still willing to be ableist is around intelligence. And we're still willing to be you're an idiot. Just think how common it is. You're a moron, you're stupid, just as a common insult, right? if that is nothing if not ableist. So we're really not able to face that. We're really not able to face like, hey, we treat people not just, we don't put people who are lower in intelligence like, oh, we should be putting people who are lower in intelligence in positions of power. Hey, we're doing that anyway. Or lower in certain sort of aspects of intelligence. It's that we treat them very poorly. Now, I know this. I'm going to talk about something very personal here. I know this because I have dyslexia. If you've been here for any amount of time and watched me try to read comments or write back and see various spelling mistakes popping up, I have dyslexia. I consider myself a average intelligence. I'm okay. I'm not, that's fine. And the way that I'm treated when I make a spelling mistake or when I read something incorrectly, it's like immediate laughter, immediate like, that's so stupid. It's like, oh, I can see the contrast here because I know that it's not because of my intelligence that I'm making these mistakes. There's a gap here, but it sucks. It's not ideal. It's painful, and I just have to be like, okay, people are ignorant. That's just the way things are, and we want to remember that what's happened in the U.S. is a kind of, I think, part of the conflict. Again, this isn't exactly answering your question because I don't know the answer. Is that we treat people who are lower intelligence, which a lot of people are lower IQ, we treat them like animals. And that would make, considering what you're doing, you're taking people who are potentially more prone to, not using logic in their decision making and treating them like animals, treating them like lower class human beings. And the net result of that is terrifying. It's like I don't know. To me, it's really sad, and it's also the net result of that is people feel like they need to defend themselves in ways that are often like really chaotic and really unrelated to what's actually happening in their environment. Also, why it's happening in the U.S. This is another hot take, but my sense, and I might be completely wrong here, is that unfettered sort of. We were built and we structure our relationship to the world by our values, right? And our values are what we actually do. They're not just like sort of what we think we'd like to do. So we all like to think like, here, what's a value that's sort of universal? People should be treated fairly, right? Okay, that's pretty universal. People should not be punished out of proportion to the thing that they did wrong. Okay, that's a pretty universal ideal, right? If somebody gives you a dirty look, should they be killed? Probably not, right? There should be some proportion there. Maybe we're allowed to give them a dirty look back or whatever, right? So we want there to be some proportion of punishment to infraction, that kind of thing. And we sort of go very counter to those when it comes to the ideal of the freedom afforded to us from capital. And this sort of like this idea that if capital had unlimited ability for all of its sort of internal logic to just do whatever it wanted, that would just be inherently good. From a Buddhist perspective, nothing is inherently good and nothing is inherently evil. In fact, good and evil are sort of like categories that don't exist or aren't considered significant. The category is skillful or unskillful. And the premise is that, capitalism as an example, or the internet, right? The question, is the internet bad? Well, actually, what it is the internet is inherently neutral. This is coming from a Buddhist perspective. It can be used skillfully. It can help people connect. It can, create greater dialogue. We can have, wonderful situations like this where I get to chat with you, be part of your life. You can be part of my life. Lovely. And it can be used for terrible things, for child trafficking or for, various types of abuse and these kind of things. So is it good or is it bad? Well, what we would do often is measure, okay, how much of this is good? Oh, okay, well, how much of this is bad? And try to compare the two. And people will make arguments. Well, I have a piece of it that's good, so it must be good. And I have a piece of this that's bad. Well, it must be bad. Well, actually, zooming out, not so much. It's inherently neutral. And there are aspects of it that can be used skillfully, aspects of it that can be used unskillfully. So when we look at capital, what I think has happened is that there's been no real dialogue about which parts of this are skillful which parts of this are neutral, which is going to be most of the parts, and which parts of these are really harmful. And it seems like, the discussion on which parts of those are harmful tends to happen on the left. And I think that a lot of what we're seeing is a combination of the expansion of sort of just ideology around just capital can do whatever it wants. Like anything capital related and the drives of capitalism are inherently good. I think that's one thing that's a driver here. Another thing is that we've created media forms, social media, the sort of 24-hour news entity that is driven because of capital on outrage. And so there's people who get completely whipped up, and that drives views. So again, this is an example. Hey, if people will click on this, it will drive more views. So we have this sense in our culture that we're much more in opposition to each other than we typically actually are. And this is something, if I ever argue with people on Twitter, they're like, what was the most recent thing? They're like, Antifa, they're my favorite thing. Antifa are fascists, which is like, okay, now we're entering a level of comedy that's like, total bizarre world. So, but I'll talk to the person and say, hey, so like forgetting Antifa for a minute, like would you be in support of an organization that actively tried to fight against racism and white nationalism and various forms of violent racism? Would you be in support of a entity like that? And the responses will be like, screw you, dummy. You think that? I'm like, wow, like I'm saying like, hey, listen, let's assume for a minute, I don't agree, but let's assume for a minute that Antifa is a terrible organization. How can we like actually have a dialogue with each other? And so because of this click culture and because it's shaped these things, we have a sense that like we're in total opposition. We need to fight, right? We had some comments here earlier from Will Alexander, and I can detect in my body, right, that there's this like sense of tension. There's this thing. There's an identity that was created, and okay, that identity needs to be defended. And if I can't defend it in X, Y, and Z way, then I'll be in danger. Blah blah blah. All of these things occurring, right? And unless this is just my general take, unless I can observe these things and watch them as they're arising and decide, okay, do I want to use the energy of whatever, self-arising or a difference that's being created or emotional velocity that's sort of accumulating, unless I want to use those, is that really helpful? And if I can't choose whether it's helpful or whether I want to use it, is it really a freedom, that choice, or is it a prison that I'm locked in and I have no escape from? And so a lot of what we talk about in terms of meditation is about freedom. And one of those freedoms is not just like freedom, like I can, have as many guns as I want. Well, that's a kind of freedom. But it doesn't really matter if or freedom of understanding of facts and figures and this kind of thing, that the freedom that's afforded there. We don't really get a lot of, we don't really get any real significant freedom from that unless we can actually step out of that role, step out of that identity. And for me, the way that I've developed to significantly or the way that I've developed myself, skills that I've developed, to significantly step out of those, you could say, potential jails, those potential forms of prison, is through meditation, is through working with, psychological work with therapists and, the sort of realm of plant medicine, this kind of thing, but all with a emphasis on freeing my internal experience, but then being able to use that internal experience to be of support and help in the world. I've found that's the significant driver and sort of arrangement of my experience. So folks, here's what I'm going to suggest. I have a wish for you. The wish is that you just take a little bit of time at this moment right now and just tune into your sensory experience. What's happening? Feeling the momentum of this conversation so far. Recognition of that momentum is the central route, one of the main ways to step out of that momentum, to not be forced into a drive of thinking. if someone makes a comment and the system lights up and I'm going to, etc., to watch that. Look at it arising. Look at the impulses it's telling me to interact with. Doesn't mean we can't take those interactions. Like I mentioned, I've been happily participating in the protests that have been happening recently. And this discussion around reforming police and making it more of a community organized process, I think is excellent. I highly support that. So that's letting myself fall into that set of action. So here's what I'm going to recommend, here's what I'm going to wish for you, is just to be able to track and connect with your emotional experience now, in the next few hours, today, in your interactions with other people, just coming back to this simple practice over and over. What is occurring in the body? Oh, hello, Mr. Drill. What's occurring in the body, and how is it interacting? What's occurring? Not needing it to be different, if possible. And if we do need it to be different, we're like, I want this experience to be different. I need this drill to stop, right? Just recognizing that as another sensation, another piece of nature arising, not a problem. And if it's helpful, the meditation that we did earlier in this exact live stream is available, and that's one really straightforward route to begin to navigate and experience emotion and know what's occurring. And of course, the 15 guided meditations, which are listed here in the chat and are listed in the description of the video below, are another great way of interacting with that. So folks, great to see you. Look forward to seeing you very soon. And we're going to add this end screen here. As always, thank you folks for joining. Thanks for being here. Always lovely to be here with you. Always lovely to spend a little time with you and chit-chat about what's going on in life, what's happening. In a safe space where we can talk about what's going on, talk about our challenges. Just know that you're appreciated, and look forward to seeing you back here in fewer than 24 hours. Thank you again. Will Alexander, just wanted to mention, I didn't get, I'm looking back here, just wanted to mention, it was emotional, right? Thanks 2020, it was an emotional ride. So Will Alexander, I want to mention that a lot of the facts and figures that I went through actually were from the book that I mentioned, the New Jim Crow. It's a little bit outdated, those studies, but a lot of it has to do with the weighted rates of incarceration for Black and Brown people relative to their population in communities, and punishments for crimes, even after they've entered the system, with taking into account that there is more crime potentially in their area. The sentencing is actually much harsher for Black and Brown people, so that shouldn't be. If the argument was, well, there's more crime in Black and Brown areas, so therefore that would be why there would be greater statistics and greater violence in these areas. It should not play out in sentencing. Sentencing should actually be neutral in that way, ideally. The other issue is that by what they do is they allocate police presence based on how much crime there is in any given area. Well, now you have, double the cops in one area because there's more crime there. Well, if you have more cops wandering around with their ticket books and their guns, guess what they're going to do? They're going to report more crime. Guess what that means? More cops. And so now you have waves of cops in these areas that, maybe are violent, but maybe not. And they, arrest people or give them tickets for, drinking on their porch. And once they do that, the person's entered into the system, and that escalates to make them much more likely to return to the system, this kind of thing. So these are all a bunch of facts that are helpful and interesting in this discussion. So thanks for that. Sorry I didn't get to mention that earlier, just looking back at some of your comments. Folks, again, lovely to see you. Very excited. In fewer than 24 hours, we're going to be back here having a good old time, meditating and having fun. Okay, folks, have a great day. Look forward to seeing you soon.